My stepmom's scheme to sabotage my wedding backfired, leading to her being kicked out and facing divorce. When my dad, David, introduced me to Carla, I wanted to believe she was going to be a blessing in our lives. I was 12 years old, and after years of seeing my dad navigate life as a single parent, it was hard not to be hopeful. Carla came into our lives like a breath of fresh air, always smiling, always eager to include me in her plans. She baked cookies the first time we met, bought me a small bracelet just because, and gushed about how much she was looking forward to being part of our family. At first, it seemed perfect. Carla had a knack for making people feel special when she wanted to. She'd take me shopping, listen to my little middle school dramas, and help me with homework. She played the role of the ideal stepmother so well that, for a while, I let my guard down. But things started to shift once she and my dad tied the knot. The small, supportive gestures began to fade, replaced by subtle, dismissive comments. When I excitedly shared my grades or accomplishments, she'd find a way to pivot the conversation back to herself. "That's great, sweetie," she'd say before launching into a story about her own successes, usually punctuated with how much harder things were in her day. If I ever expressed frustration or had a bad day, Carla would wave it off with a sigh. "You're young. You don't even know what stress is yet," she'd say, her tone a mix of superiority and exasperation. It didn't take long for me to notice a pattern. Carla thrived on being the center of attention. She loved to play the role of the perfect wife and stepmother in front of my dad, but when it was just the two of us, her demeanor shifted. She had a way of making everything feel like my fault. If I accidentally left a dish in the sink, it became a lecture about how I didn't respect the household. If I disagreed with her, she'd tell me I was being disrespectful and that I needed to learn gratitude for all she'd done for me. My dad, of course, never saw this side of her. Around him, she was nothing but patient and understanding. She'd smooth over conflicts by saying things like, "Oh, it's just teenage hormones," while giving me a pointed look behind his back. The worst part was her knack for twisting situations to make herself look like the victim. Once, when I was 15, we got into an argument because she threw away a sketchbook I'd been working on for weeks. "It was just lying around," she said defensively when I confronted her. "You never take care of your things," and I was trying to tidy up. When my dad came home and saw me upset, Carla was quick to paint herself as the one who was hurt. "I was just trying to help," she told him, dabbing her eyes for effect. I can't believe she'd be so ungrateful. By the time I moved out for college, I thought I'd finally have some distance from her manipulations. But Carla wasn't content to just fade into the background. Instead, she ramped up her efforts to undermine me. She'd call me at random hours, peppering the conversations with passive-aggressive remarks about how I was forgetting where I came from or putting too much pressure on my dad. She also started planting seeds of doubt in the extended family. At one family gathering, I overheard her telling my aunt that I was irresponsible with money and that my dad was too generous in helping me with tuition. It wasn't true. I had scholarships and a part-time job, but the damage was done. I spent the entire visit fielding judgmental looks and veiled comments about growing up and being independent. Once, when I confronted her about the rumors, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. You're just too sensitive, honey." It was infuriating. No matter how clearly I pointed out her behavior, she always managed to deflect blame, leaving me feeling like I was the unreasonable one. Still, I kept most of this to myself. My dad loved her, or at least he thought he did, and I didn't want to be the one to take that happiness away from him. So, I endured Carla's antics, biting my tongue more often than not. But, as I would soon learn, tolerating her wasn't enough. Carla wasn't satisfied with small manipulations. She thrived on control, and she wasn't about to let my happiness, or my future, overshadow her own. Ethan proposed on a cool autumn evening under a canopy of string lights in the backyard of the home we'd just bought together. It was perfect, intimate and heartfelt, just like our relationship. The moment was ours, untouched by drama or outside interference. But even as I basked in the glow of our new engagement, a small, nagging thought crept into the back of my mind. How will Carla react? Still, I held on to the hope that maybe this time, she'd surprise me. My dad's reaction had been everything I'd wanted: tears of joy, a big hug, and a promise to support us however he could. Surely Carla, as his partner, would share in his happiness. When Ethan and I told my dad and Carla the news over dinner a few days later, her reaction was exactly what I expected: performative and insincere. She plastered on a tight-lipped smile, congratulated us, and gave Ethan a strained hug. That's wonderful news, she said, her tone as flat as the cheap wine she insisted on serving. But Carla couldn't help herself. The congratulations barely lasted a minute before she pivoted into unsolicited advice. You don't want to go overboard, she said, her fork hovering midair. Weddings can be such a financial burden on families. Her eyes darted to my dad, as if she were already preemptively lamenting the cost. I clenched my jaw, and I kept the conversation polite, knowing there was no point in engaging. Carla thrived on drama, and the last thing I wanted was to give her more ammunition. Still, I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Over the following weeks, Carla's thinly veiled criticisms became a regular feature of our interactions. Every decision Ethan and I made, no matter how minor, seemed to warrant her disapproval. She scoffed at our venue, claiming it was too extravagant. When I showed her a photo of my dress, she wrinkled her nose and said, "It's nice, but don't you think it's a little too much for someone your height?" I tried to brush it off, but her comments had a way of planting seeds of doubt. She was subtle, too, always framing her remarks as helpful suggestions. "I'm just looking out for you," she'd say when I pushed back. "I don't want you to look back and regret anything." The guest list was another battleground. Ethan and I had decided on a large wedding, inviting family and friends from both sides. Carla, predictably, found this excessive. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen during a family dinner, waving a printed copy of the guest list in the air. "Do you really need all these people there?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "I mean, half of them are just acquaintances. Weddings should be intimate, not some giant production." I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. "Ethan and I are happy with the list, Carla. These are people who matter to us." She gave a patronizing laugh and patted my shoulder. "Oh, sweetie, you'll understand one day when you're older. You'll see how wasteful it all is." Ethan, bless him, noticed how much her comments were getting to me. One evening, as we were going over wedding plans, he put his hand over mine. "You know she's just trying to get under your skin, right?" he said gently. "I know," I replied, my voice tight. "But it's exhausting. She's picking apart everything I do." "She's not the one marrying me," he said with a grin. "You are. So, let her nitpick. It doesn't change anything." I smiled, grateful for his perspective. But even as I tried to focus on the positive, I couldn't shake the feeling that Carla's meddling was just the beginning. There was something calculating in the way she looked at me during those conversations, something that hinted she wasn't just unhappy about being sidelined. She was planning something. And knowing Carla, it wouldn't be small. The evening started innocently enough. Ethan and I were curled up on the couch, flipping through our wedding binder and finalizing details like seating arrangements and flower selections. It was one of those rare, peaceful moments where the stress of planning seemed manageable. I remember laughing at one of his jokes when his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Ethan glanced at it, expecting another email from our caterer, but his expression shifted as he read the message. His brow furrowed, his mouth set in a tight line. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, turning the phone toward me. The text was from Carla. A wall of text, filled with accusations that made my stomach twist into knots. She claimed I was secretly seeing someone else, describing in detail how I was supposedly meeting up with another man behind Ethan's back. She wrote that I was using Ethan for his stability and that she couldn't sit by and let him ruin his life by marrying a liar. Attached to the message were a few photos, grainy, poorly edited images that showed me at a restaurant, seated across from a man who wasn't Ethan. The photos were laughably fake, the angles were awkward, and the lighting on the two figures didn't even match. But it was the sheer audacity of it that left me speechless. My initial reaction was disbelief. I stared at the screen, reading the message again and again, hoping I'd misinterpreted it. But the words stayed the same, bold and cruel, an unmistakable attack on my character and my relationship. Ethan shook his head, scrolling through the text with a mix of irritation and disgust. "This is absurd," he said firmly. She didn't even try to make it convincing. Did she really think I'd fall for this? "She's trying to drive a wedge between us," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "She's always hated me, but this is next level." Ethan put the phone down and pulled me into a hug. "I don't believe a word of it," he reassured me. "You don't have to explain anything. I know who you are, and I know what this is. Desperation." While his words comforted me, they didn't erase the fury boiling inside me. Carla wasn't just spreading rumors or making passive-aggressive comments. She was actively trying to destroy my relationship. I felt a burning need to confront her, to call her out on this disgusting behavior once and for all. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and dialed my dad's number. He answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful. "Hey, sweetheart. What's up?" I cut straight to the point. "Dad, you need to come over.
Now.
We need to talk about Carla." There was a pause, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. "What's going on? Did something happen?" "Something happened, all right," I said bitterly. "Carla just sent Ethan a text accusing me of cheating. She even attached fake photos to try and prove it." The line went silent for a moment, and when my dad spoke again, his voice was quieter, uncertain. "Are you sure there's not some kind of misunderstanding?" "No, Dad," I snapped, anger flaring. "There's no misunderstanding. I have the screenshots. She's trying to ruin my wedding." He sighed heavily. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I hung up, I felt a surge of determination. Carla had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. For years, I tolerated her manipulations, biting my tongue for my dad's sake. But this was different. This was war. My dad arrived at my house in record time, his face a mix of concern and confusion. He stepped inside, shrugging off his coat, and immediately asked, "What's this all about? What's going on with Carla's?" I wasted no time. "She's trying to ruin my wedding, Dad," I said, thrusting Ethan's phone into his hands. "Look at these texts. Look at what she sent Ethan." He squinted at the screen, reading the long, accusatory message with growing unease. When he reached the attached photos, his face turned pale. "This can't be right," he muttered. "Carla wouldn't. I mean, maybe there's some kind of misunderstanding." I crossed my arms, my frustration boiling over. "There's no misunderstanding, Dad. She made this up. She photoshopped these pictures to make it look like I'm cheating. This isn't just some petty comment or offhand remark. She's trying to destroy my relationship." He hesitated, his grip on the phone tightening. "I don't know what to say," he mumbled, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Say that you'll confront her," I shot back. "Because I'm done letting her get away with this." To his credit, my dad didn't try to brush it off any further. He sighed deeply, like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and said, "Let's talk to her together. I need to hear her side of the story." He called Carla into the room, his tone calm but firm. Moments later, she walked in, her demeanor saccharine as always. "David? Sweetheart? What's going on?" she asked, flashing her usual fake smile. My dad didn't respond right away. Instead, he handed her Ethan's phone, his expression unreadable. "Can you explain this?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Carla glanced at the screen, and for a moment, her face betrayed a flicker of panic. But she recovered quickly, slipping into her well-worn mask of feigned innocence. "I don't understand," she said, her tone light. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" "You know exactly what this is," I said sharply. "You sent this to Ethan. You accused me of cheating and included fake photos to try and back it up." Carla scoffed, but her smile had disappeared. "I was trying to protect your father," she said, her voice rising. "You don't know what she's capable of, David. She's just like her mother, manipulative and selfish." That was the breaking point for me. Years of frustration, hurt, and pent-up anger bubbled to the surface. "You're projecting, Carla," I snapped, my voice shaking with rage. "You've been undermining me for years, but this is psychotic. You crossed a line, and I won't let you get away with it." My dad looked back and forth between us, clearly overwhelmed. "Carla," he said, his tone pleading, "why would you do this? What were you thinking?" Carla's composure cracked further. "I was thinking about you," she hissed.
She's using you, David.
"She doesn't care about this family. She never has. I've been the one holding everything together while she's been off living her selfish little life." "You've got to be kidding me," I said, laughing bitterly. "You've been tearing this family apart from the moment you stepped into it. I've stayed quiet for years because I didn't want to hurt Dad, but I'm done. Everyone can see through you now." My dad didn't say much during the argument, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. For the first time, he wasn't rushing to Carla's defense. He wasn't dismissing my concerns or making excuses for her behavior. He was really seeing her for who she truly was. Carla, sensing the shift, doubled down. "You're really going to believe her over me?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "After everything I've done for this family?" My dad stared at her for a long moment, then handed the phone back to me. "I need some time to think," he said quietly, his voice heavy with disappointment. Carla opened her mouth to protest, but he held up a hand to stop her.
No.
I've heard enough. As she stormed out of the room, her heels clicking against the floor, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The confrontation was over, but I knew this was just the beginning of the fallout. The confrontation left a heavy silence between my dad and me. For years, I'd avoided putting him in a position where he had to choose between Carla and me, but the time for restraint had passed. After everything she'd done, the lies, the manipulation, the outright sabotage of my relationship, I couldn't let her stay in his life. A few days after the argument, I sat down with my dad in his living room. Carla was conveniently out running errands, which gave us a rare moment to talk alone. "Dad," I began, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me, "I need to say this, and I need you to hear me." He leaned back, looking exhausted but attentive. "Go on."
I can't keep doing this, I said.
"I've put up with Carla for years for you, but this time, she crossed a line. She didn't just attack me. She tried to ruin my relationship with Ethan. She's toxic, and if you let her stay in your life, I can't be part of it anymore." His eyes widened, and I could see the conflict written all over his face. "You're giving me an ultimatum," he said softly, as if testing the weight of the words. "Yes," I replied, my voice firm. "Because I can't keep letting her hurt me, and I won't let her keep hurting you, either. You need to make a choice, Dad. It's her or me." The room fell silent. My dad stared at the floor, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I could see the gears turning in his mind as he grappled with what I'd just said. He'd been married to Carla for over a decade. No matter how much evidence I had against her, I knew this wasn't an easy decision for him. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But she's my wife. I can't just throw her out like she means nothing to me." "I'm not asking you to pretend she means nothing," I said, trying to keep my tone even.
But you've seen what she's done, Dad.
"Those texts, those fake photos. This isn't someone who cares about us. It's someone who cares about control." He looked at me, his expression pained. "Do you really think she's beyond redemption?" I hesitated for a moment before nodding.
Yes.
"She's had years to change, and she's only gotten worse. If you keep her in your life, you'll lose me. And I don't think I can ever trust her again." A week later, my dad called me, his voice heavy with resolve. "I've made my decision," he said. "Carla's leaving." Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by dread. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Sure enough, when Carla found out, her reaction was explosive. She screamed, she cried, she threw accusations around like confetti. "I gave you the best years of my life," she shouted at my dad as she paced the living room. "And this is how you repay me? By letting her manipulate you into throwing me out." When tears didn't work, she turned her fury on me. "You've always been jealous of me," she spat, her voice venomous. "You can't stand to see me happy. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You couldn't handle the fact that I was part of this family." Her words didn't hurt me as much as they used to. I'd seen through her facade, and I wasn't falling for her guilt-tripping anymore. "This isn't about jealousy," I said calmly. "This is about accountability. You've spent years tearing people down to make yourself feel better, and now you're facing the consequences." Carla's eyes burned with hatred, but she didn't say anything else. She stomped upstairs to pack her things, slamming doors and muttering curses under her breath. As I watched her leave, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and an underlying sense of guilt. Carla was out of our lives, but the damage she'd done would take a long time to heal. And part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last we'd see of her. Carla was gone, but her absence didn't bring the peace I'd hoped for. Instead, it left behind a tangled mess of emotions and unresolved issues. My dad, devastated by the collapse of his marriage, called me almost every day, his voice heavy with guilt and regret. "I should have seen it sooner," he said one night, his voice breaking. "I should have protected you from her, but I let myself get blinded by love. I let her hurt you for years, and I didn't do a damn thing about it." I tried to reassure him, but the truth was, I didn't know what to say. I'd spent so long resenting Carla for the way she manipulated him that it felt strange to hear him acknowledge it now. Part of me wanted to say, "Yes, you should have seen it sooner," but I didn't. He was hurting enough already. "You couldn't have known, Dad," I told him instead. "She was good at hiding it. But now you do, and that's what matters." Carla, unsurprisingly, didn't leave quietly. For the first few weeks after she moved out, she bombarded both my dad and me with messages. Some were long, tearful apologies, claiming she'd acted out of love and fear for our family. Others were angry tirades, accusing me of orchestrating her downfall. At first, I ignored her. But when she started showing up in places she had no business being, my workplace, my favorite coffee shop, I realized she wasn't going to stop on her own. One afternoon, she cornered me in the parking lot outside my office, her face a mask of desperation. "Please, just hear me out," she begged, clutching my arm. "You have to understand, I was trying to protect your father. I never meant for things to go this far." I pulled my arm away, my voice firm. "Carla, this isn't the time or the place. You need to leave." She didn't budge. "You're turning him against me," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "You've always wanted me out of the picture. Admit it." "I don't have to turn him against you," I shot back. "You did that all on your own." It took a call to HR and a security escort to get her to leave that day. After that, I started watching my surroundings more carefully, double-checking my locks and looking over my shoulder in public. Carla might not have had access to my life anymore, but she was finding ways to haunt me from the outside. Through it all, Ethan was my rock. He listened patiently when I vented about Carla's latest antics, held me when the stress became too much, and reminded me that we were in this together. "You're not alone in this," he said one night as we lay in bed, his hand resting on mine. "She can't hurt you anymore, not really." But even Ethan couldn't deny the toll the situation was taking. One evening, after yet another text from Carla popped up on my phone, he sighed heavily. "It's like she's still trying to control you," he said, shaking his head. "Even from a distance, she's trying to stay in your life, to keep her hooks in you." He wasn't wrong. Carla had always thrived on power and control, and losing that must have been unbearable for her. But her desperation to hold on to anything was becoming unbearable for me. Carla was gone, but her presence lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder that some battles don't end when the antagonist walks out the door. Sometimes, the scars they leave behind take on a life of their own. My dad's decision to file for divorce came with a sense of finality, but it also triggered a storm none of us were fully prepared for. Carla did not take the news well. When she was served the papers, she showed up at my dad's house unannounced, pounding on the door and demanding to be let in. "David, you can't be serious," she shouted, her voice cracking. "After everything we've been through, you're just going to throw it all away because of her?" When he didn't open the door, she turned to pleading, sobbing theatrically on the porch. "I was trying to protect you," she cried. "Everything I did was for us, for this family. Please, don't let her come between us." My dad watched from the window, his face pale and drawn. "She doesn't care about me," he said quietly. "She just cares about winning." It was the first time I'd heard him admit it out loud. The divorce proceedings were grueling. Carla fought tooth and nail for everything she could, dragging out the process for months. She demanded alimony, even though my dad had supported her financially for most of their marriage. She tried to claim a share of the house, despite contributing nothing to its purchase or upkeep. At one point, she even tried to claim she'd been instrumental in building his business, a laughable assertion that was quickly dismissed when my dad's lawyer produced records showing she'd had no involvement whatsoever. In court, Carla oscillated between playing the victim and acting as though she'd been the glue holding the marriage together. "I loved him," she said during one hearing, her voice trembling as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "All I ever wanted was to protect him and this family. I never meant to hurt anyone." But the evidence against her was overwhelming. My dad's lawyer presented the texts and photos she'd sent to Ethan, as well as accounts from family members who had witnessed her manipulative behavior over the years. The judge wasn't swayed by her tearful performance. "This isn't about love," the judge said firmly during one ruling. "This is about control." In the end, my dad kept the house, but the victory felt hollow. By the time the divorce was finalized, he was emotionally drained, his once vibrant energy dulled by months of legal battles and personal upheaval. The night of the final hearing, he came over to my house for dinner. We sat on the back porch, watching the sunset in silence for a while before he finally spoke. "I wasted so many years with her," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I ignored the warning signs, let her push you away, and for what? To keep the peace." "You can't change the past, Dad," I said gently. "But you're free now. That counts for something." He nodded, but his expression remained somber. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for letting it get this far. She hurt you, hurt us, and I just let it happen." I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that Carla's manipulations weren't something he could have foreseen. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I fully believed it myself. The day of my wedding arrived like a long-awaited breath of fresh air. After months of chaos and tension, it felt surreal to finally focus on something joyful. The morning was filled with nervous excitement as I slipped into my dress, surrounded by my bridesmaids and my mom. But even in those moments of happiness, there was an undercurrent of sadness. Carla's absence, while necessary, left an odd emptiness. My dad, who had always been the steadfast, unshakable figure in my life, seemed a little more subdued than usual. When he arrived to see me before the ceremony, his smile was genuine but tinged with something else, regret, maybe, or weariness from the storm we'd weathered together. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He took my hands in his, and I noticed how tired he looked, how much older he seemed than he had just a year ago. "I'm so proud of you. You've always been strong. But this, what you've been through, you've handled it with more grace than I ever could." Walking down the aisle with my dad was bittersweet. His grip on my arm was steady, but I could feel the emotion radiating from him with every step we took. As we approached Ethan, my heart swelled with love for the man waiting for me at the end of the aisle, but it also ached for my dad. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with laughter, tears, and promises of forever. Ethan's vows made me cry, and when we were pronounced husband and wife, the applause from our friends and family felt like a collective sigh of relief. Finally, something good, something pure. But Carla's absence hung in the air like a shadow. I noticed it in the quiet whispers of a few distant relatives who clearly knew about the drama, but didn't know how to broach it. "Shame about David's wife," I overheard one of them say to another during the reception. "I heard she tried to sabotage the wedding." I wanted to scream, to tell them to let it go, but I bit my tongue. This was my day, and I wasn't going to let Carla's actions poison it further. As the night wound down, my dad found me standing alone on the balcony, staring out at the stars. He walked over, his steps slow and deliberate, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You know," he said quietly, "this is one of the happiest days of my life." I smiled, leaning into him slightly. "Even with everything that's happened?" "Especially because of everything that's happened," he replied. "You stood up to Carla in a way I never could. You didn't let her destroy what you've built, and I'm so proud of you for that." His words stayed with me long after the reception ended. They were bittersweet, just like the day itself. I was finally free of Carla's manipulations, starting a new chapter with Ethan. But the scars she'd left on my dad and me, on our family, were still fresh, and I wasn't sure how long it would take for them to fade. If they ever would. For a while after the divorce, it seemed like Carla might actually disappear from our lives. My dad blocked her number, and I did the same. The silence was almost disconcerting at first, as if we were holding our breath, waiting for the next storm to hit. But then, the messages started coming through again, this time from new numbers, burner accounts, and even handwritten letters. Carla wasn't going quietly. Her initial messages were directed at my dad. She vacillated between begging and blaming, alternating tones with dizzying speed. One day, she'd send tearful apologies, claiming she was misunderstood and only acted out of love. "David, I was scared," one message read. "I thought she was using you, and I overreacted. Please, let's talk." The next day, her tone would shift entirely. "You're a coward," another text read. "You let your daughter destroy us because you're too weak to stand up to her manipulations." My dad tried to brush it off, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. He'd sigh heavily whenever his phone buzzed, knowing it was probably another message from Carla. "She doesn't know when to quit," he said once, tossing his phone onto the table. "She's exhausting herself, and for what? There's nothing left to salvage." When Carla realized my dad wasn't going to engage, she turned her focus to me. At first, it was subtle, comments sent through mutual acquaintances, or vague, cryptic emails about clearing the air, but then she crossed a line. One morning, Ethan handed me an envelope that had arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, but the contents inside were unmistakably Carla's handiwork. It was a letter addressed directly to Ethan, apologizing for the text messages she'd sent and claiming that she'd been misguided in her actions. "I see now that I was wrong," the letter read. "But I only did what I did because I love this family and I didn't want to see it fall apart. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me and help David and me mend things." Ethan's face was stone as he handed me the letter. "She's delusional," he said simply, tossing it into the trash. But I couldn't brush it off so easily. The fact that she'd reached out to Ethan, my husband, made my skin crawl. It felt like a violation. A reminder that no matter how much distance we tried to put between ourselves and Carla, she would always find a way to worm her way back in. I started to wonder if she'd ever truly leave us alone. Carla wasn't the type to admit defeat. She thrived on control, and losing her grip on my dad, and by extension, me, seemed to have left a void she was determined to fill. One day, after yet another letter arrived, I sat down with Ethan and my dad to discuss what to do. "She's not stopping," I said, spreading the letters and messages across the table like evidence in a courtroom. "If anything, she's escalating." My dad nodded solemnly. "I've been thinking about a restraining order," he admitted. "But I worry that'll just provoke her more." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "She's already provoked. I don't think ignoring her is working." As we debated our options, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Carla might have been out of the house, but she wasn't out of our lives. And the longer she lingered on the edges, the more I feared she'd find a way to claw her way back in. Carla's relentlessness was like a shadow, always present, always waiting. And no matter how much distance we tried to put between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. It's been months since the last message from Carla. The silence should feel like relief, but instead, it feels heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Ethan and I have tried to settle into married life, focusing on the future we've been building together. For the most part, it's been good. Our days are filled with little joys like cooking dinner together, planning trips, and dreaming about starting a family. But no matter how much distance we put between ourselves and Carla, her shadow still lingers. My dad is doing his best to move forward, but the divorce took something out of him. He's quieter now, more reflective, and there's a sadness in his eyes that wasn't there before. I see it most when he visits our house for dinner. He'll smile and laugh, but when he thinks no one is looking, he stares off into the distance, lost in thought. One night, as we were cleaning up after a meal, he paused, dish towel in hand, and said, "Do you think she'll ever really leave us alone?"
I didn't know how to answer.
"I hope so," I said finally, but the words felt hollow, even as I said them. The truth is, I still feel her presence everywhere. When I'm out running errands, I catch myself scanning crowds for her face, even though I know it's unlikely she'd show up. Every time an unknown number calls my phone, my chest tightens until I see it's just a telemarketer or a wrong number. Ethan tries to reassure me, but I can tell he feels it too. The unease that comes from knowing Carla's obsession isn't something that disappears overnight. "We'll handle it if she comes back," he said one evening, pulling me into his arms. Together, I nodded, grateful for his support, but deep down I knew it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. Carla wasn't the type to let go, and the silence felt more like a strategic retreat than a surrender. Life goes on, of course. Ethan and I have started talking about the possibility of children, and my dad is considering selling the house he shared with Carla, hoping a fresh start will help him heal. On the surface, things look normal, even happy. But some nights, when the house is quiet and Ethan is asleep beside me, I lie awake, thinking about the ways Carla has shaped our lives. She's not here, but she's still part of the story, still a ghost in the corner of my mind, waiting for her chance to reappear. Part of me hopes this really is the end, that she's finally given up and moved on. But another part of me knows better. Carla doesn't let things go. She thrives on control, and the thought of us living peacefully without her is probably eating away at her even now. I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, she's still watching, still planning, still waiting for her next move. And while I don't know what form that move will take, one thing is certain. The story of Carla isn't over yet.